For the
Chair, Happy New Year, everyone, and thanks to Sandra for the hard work on this draft. I know colleagues have said we're all on the same page on this, but obviously we aren't. And we've had these points many times before, and I'm not going to rehash them all. And again, just to say, it's not that we don't think that foreign interference is real. Of course it is. It exists and has existed as long as politics have been in place. But our point would essentially be that everybody does it. And the way in which we present it here is a little bit one-sided, concentrating on our geopolitical rivals and not giving as much attention to the interference that comes from our so-called allies and so on. So we mention Russia, China, Iran ad nauseum, but nobody ever mentions the US, or maybe that our stance on the Russian war in Ukraine and our abandonment of reliance on energy forces from Russia has ended us up in the hands of the US, for example, paying 4 times as much for LNG as US citizens do. But in any case, I do think that the more recent scandals have put that side of the equation, our allies, if you like, more in focus. And I very much agree with colleagues that we need to reflect Qatar, Morocco and the other areas linked to this scandal somehow in the report. It's really difficult, and it's not, we all have to work on how we might do that. I'm sympathetic as well to points colleagues made about captured elites and so on, but again, to make the point that it's not just about people going a revolving door, going to work for a Russian company or whatever. What about the people who go to Goldman Sachs to represent corporate global capital and the influence that that has on economic policies of Europe and so on? So these are all, if you like, methods of interference. But maybe rather than focusing on points of difference, except one point I will make is that we have to be really careful in relation to the way in which we deal with migrants who are human beings and dehumanising them as sort of collateral and some form of foreign interference, we have to be very careful about. But just maybe a brief point in terms of the areas that we could work on, because I think Sandra's report was very coherent and in the interest of being constructive maybe to deal with the areas where we could maybe work on it, because by its very nature, foreign interference means a curtailment of fundamental rights, and there's a warning that it could impact on freedom of expression, and we have to be very careful. And in fairness, I think the report this time reflects that better than the first report did. I mean, we particularly like the fact that it was tuned into this on paragraph 2, paragraph 88, dealing with the fact that we need to protect fundamental rights, and we need to be careful that dealing with foreign interference isn't used to curb media freedom. So I'm really glad that Sandra has included those points. We think that's very positive, and it's something we'd like to work on to maybe develop a bit more, because actually it's the topic of our next discussion, where I think the report that we'll be hearing about next makes some very good suggestions around that, about how fundamental rights should be sort of checked in relation to every measure we implement in relation to this area. So that's something we'd like to explore a bit in relation to our amendments, sort of distinguishing between legitimate and illegitimate activities rather than sort of a broad brush stuff. So building in fundamental rights, I think, is something that we could work on. But again, to thank Sandra for the work on this.